Hello and good morning, everyone. Only Positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off podcast number 37 on this playlist that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. Now, before diving into the book and everything like that for today, let's go and start with a level set. So, as I endeavor upon pursuing knowledge and life experience in this next phase of life through fitness, photography, traveling, cannabis, many more things, one habit that I've really formed is reading. So this podcast essentially goes through some of the books I've been reading as of late, taking those lessons learned and applying them to experiences in my life. Now, before diving into the book for today, let's go and start with today's story. So today's story is really a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more innocent in nature, right? But I think it was a really funny experience. So this past week, I got the opportunity to go spend some time with my cousins, right? And it was a amazing experience, so much fun, just catching up, laughing, chilling, and the story really comes to life with my cousin's kids, right? So he has three kids, two girls, and they're gems. They're so funny, and we actually ended up asking them to be our flower girls, right? And it was they were really receptive. They're super chatty. They're always engaging. Always want to catch us up on the things they're doing, and they're younger, right? Probably around 5 and 7 years old. So, or maybe 6 and 8, right? Somewhere around there. So, anywho, we're there on Friday, and essentially, we asked them to be our flower girls. They say yes, obviously. It'd be bogus if they said no, especially because they're kids. But so they start catching up with us. They start getting more comfortable with us because we haven't seen them in a while. They were a little bit like, oh, I haven't seen them for a minute. But they started, getting reacquainted and back to the old way we used to do things, just goofing off, laughing a lot. So anyway, one of them is telling me all these stories, a younger one, right? And she's just the cutest. So she's waving her hand. She's telling me this animated story about, how her dad threw the basketball over the fence on accident, and he didn't want to jump over, so she went and got it. And there was like a loud lawnmower on that side, and there was a dog over there. And all safe stuff. They're all neighbors and stuff. So she would just had her hands up in the air. She was like, "Oh my God, I did this and I did that," and then the dog was barking. It was crazy, and I was just like, "Keep talking forever." You know what I mean? You're awesome. So she's the cutest, right? But the most endearing part of the story comes into play when I catch her just contemplating. She's like, looks like she's deep in thought, right? Just an existential crisis going on with her, and she's 5. So I'm just wondering, okay, so hey, what's going on? What's the matter? And she's like, how do you think Santa Claus gets down the chimney? And I was like, okay, so a side thought, right? I have not had this conversation with a kid in many years, right? I've had it before, like where you have to act like Santa's real. I just haven't done it for many years. So I had to quickly switch into that mode, being rusty, right? So she goes, how do you think Santa gets down the chimney? And I'm like, oh my gosh, she doesn't know that Santa's not real yet. So then I think for a second, I go, well, maybe he sucks in everything. Maybe he just takes a deep breath and like gets sucks in his tummy and slides down. Maybe they grease the chimney beforehand, and he just slides down there, and he probably smells the cookies that you guys leave out for him, because I know you guys leave out really good cookies. She's like, yes, we do. We bake them. And I was like, oh, okay, I knew it. And then she's like, well, how do you think he gets all the presents in his sleigh and then takes off? And I was like, well, maybe he hires some more reindeer to come, and they get in the front, and they have more power to pull. Or maybe he drops some gifts off and then he picks them up. I don't know. But what do you think? And then she goes on her little hypotheses, right? So then we ask the older one. We're like, hey, what do you think? And then she comes up and she crosses her hands and looks at the fireplace, and she goes, that's the question. If only we knew. And I was like, this is awesome, So the whole night we're talking about, like, we're like making these different like predictions on how Santa gets from one place to another. And I was just like, this is where I need to be in life right now. Like, this is so much fun. it's funny, just like the point in life, right? You reflect and think about that. Like, I love going out, getting turned with the guys. That's one of my favorite things to do, right? But when you talk about your good habits, getting up, reading, stretching, yoga, all that stuff, that's not a habit you can form on a consistent basis. So 9 out of 10 times, you're gonna catch me doing something like I just described to you, right? Maybe chilling with some friends, have a drink or two, play some board games, things like that, and then I can get a jump on the mornings. But this was such a refreshing experience, right? It really goes to show how innocent kids are, right? A little later that night, the little one's tooth fell out, right? And my cousin is like a thug, or so he acts, right? He's like, "Yo, what's up, man? What's good?" So he goes upstairs. She's showing me the tooth, right? And she's like, look, it fell out. This one. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're gonna get some money from the tooth fairy tonight, right? And so he goes upstairs, he's like, yo, he comes back down, yo, dude, you got $5? I gotta put it underneath her pillow, bro. And I'm like, dude, you're all over the place, man. But I love it. I love the shenanigans, right? A nice, innocent, good time all around. So anyway, I did that Sunday. I went to the dunes with one of my best friends. Had some good weather. Went out. Put our feet in the water. Hiked the dunes. Did about 7-8 miles that day on a beautiful, beautiful day. Here in Chicago in the fall, right? So cannot complain. Life is going well. Knock on wood, everything stays the same. And I don't know. I have nothing to complain about. So that's about it. We're gonna move on here. So. Yeah, that was my weekend. A little lighthearted story for the day, but let's come back to the book. So today we're going to be going through part 2 of the religions book, right? And just a few things, right? I'm really looking forward to the chapters where we get into the Abrahamic faiths, like Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Catholicism, even Hinduism, right? I'm looking forward to those chapters a lot. But there's a few chapters about prehistoric beliefs that we'll get out of the way first, because I think there's some interesting foundational concepts there as well. But a couple high level points on religion in general. It's hard to define what religion actually is, right? We talk about the social, the spiritual, the personal elements of it. But some form of religion has been present in pretty much every civilization from prehistory to modern day, right? So we talk about early times. There even needed to be a way of comprehending natural phenomena or explaining the reasoning behind the events that occur, right? For the events in life that people felt like they didn't have control over, they needed to have some control over by praying to a like a wind spirit or a spirit that would bring down rain to harvest the crops and things like that. Religion, it also helps provide like a unified identity, right? Those who follow the same practices as you are familiar. And, from the beginning of time through the development of modern society, we see people who are apprehensive of those who aren't on the same page as them, right? Like I said, weather, seasons, harvest, these are all subject to some spiritual explanation. You can see it prevalent in extreme climates, right? Extreme heat or cold. If there was an oasis or a heat spell, people might have thought that's an act of God, right? So things like that, right? People would die for their religions going through time. People would be persecuted, and I think the fact that religion was a vehicle to express yourself was very important, and I think that's why people fought for it. And going through modern day, even today, about 75% of the world population identifies with some sort of religion, right? And it seems that religion is almost a foundational principle in life. And religion can be a starting point for all of life's activities, and many people need that direction, right? So that's the onset, right? A couple high-level points about religion, and then we'll go into our first story for today, which is about the Zam San in prehistoric sub-Saharan Africa, right? And all the stories we're going to go through today are about prehistoric beliefs. So the Zam San, so it's XAM or SAN, right? So They were, like I said, in the area known as modern day sub-Saharan Africa. And one thing we'll talk about is the need for a world beyond this world. Like, where did that need actually arise? So, as people begin to try and make sense of the world, right? The dangers they faced, the tough times they faced, people start to rationalize a world or a realm that they couldn't see, but they knew had some sort of influence on their lives. So if you think about it, if you think about all the events in your life and where you are today, it could all be random, right? It could all have just happened by chance. But don't you feel like sometimes it's not so random and everything might happen for a reason? Now, if you ask me, like, I believe everything happens for a reason, but there's also the possibility, the explanation that things could be completely random. We don't know, right? So, coming back to the book, a lot of these notions would come from the differences in consciousness, right? Like being awake, being asleep, death, like those in between states of those three things. So these different, like, how do I put, these different consciousness and these different states of life led people to believe that there was a world outside of this one. And like what I'll say is the logic isn't faulty there, right? Like for example, for myself, and you think about it for yourself. So I think I am someone else when I'm sleepy, right? When I'm sleepy, I'm a little less social. I'm a little bit more reflective. I may be even a little bit more negative, right? I might be a little bit more quiet. Sometimes my mind wanders, and I think about the like 10 years from now. I think about the future. I think about my goals, and even when I'm sleeping, my sleep style is just weird, right? I'm moving a lot. I sleep on my stomach. I make I'm tossing and turning a whole bunch. Sometimes I'll get up to go to the bathroom in the night, and like I won't really remember it, right? I might think I remember it, but when you reflect on that behavior in the morning, you're like, dude, I was being weird last night. Like, what was going on with me? But anyway, so the book will outline that like many of the figures of like humans, animals, or like these human animal hybrids, they're constructed with these patterns and are linked to that back of the retina pattern, right? It's called entopic phenomena. Like things such as grids, dots, zigzags, wavy lines are thought to embody those visions that people have between being awake and sleeping, right? And that's kind of a gray area to be in. So I can see how folks might attribute some kind of spiritual explanation to that, right? Because it's kind of between vision and hallucination. And one thing I'll say is, in college, has anyone ever gone a whole night without sleeping and then maybe gone to work the next day or gone to some kind of function the next day? And you're definitely not the same person, right? There's been times many years ago where like a buddy of mine would just come crash for the night, right? And it was one of those things where like if this dude's coming to crash, we're gonna be up all night, right? So my buddy would come crash, and we would both go to work in the morning after staying up until like 4 a.m. I can't do that really anymore. I mean, I guess if I had to, I would, but I don't really see myself needing to. You go to work the next day, and you're not the same, right? I wouldn't say my productivity lacks at all, but you're not as one of my things at work is I'm very responsive, right? I'm very engaged at work, and maybe I'm a little bit not so much during those times, right? And like I said, it hasn't happened for a long time, but I feel like everyone can understand that example. So anyway, when we come back to the people, the Zamsan, right? We actually can't get in touch with those people, obviously, right? Because they're no longer around. But there was like kind of like a sect of the Zamsan who were like a hunter-gatherer clan. But there are some beliefs of theirs recorded down through the early 19th century, okay? So one thing we know is that they made cave paintings. They spoke in clicks of the tongue, right? And they had a written version of that as well, to distinguish the different types of clicks. And you can see some early sophistication methods in terms of their forms of speech. And you can see like logic being present and innovation in the earliest human beings, right? But let's come back to some specifics of their religion, right? So the mythology behind the Sans people or of the San people. So their mythology is heavily based off of their environment, okay? And that's natural, I'd say, right? They heavily lived off the land, so it makes sense that some of their spirituality be based off receiving their nutrients and their sustenance. So they live in a three-tiered world. Okay, so there are spirit worlds that lie above and beneath the natural world, and they have a reactive like karma type rule built in. So whatever happens in one world supposedly affects another, right, or the other. So humans with special powers could visit the upper sky realm or the lower underwater realm. And we'll talk about what, quote unquote, special powers means in a minute. But the creator lives in the sky realm with a trickster and his family, and he is known as Kagan. So the Zan believed that these were the first people to inhabit the earth. Now, this god Kagan, who usually took some sort of human form, could also transform into an animal sometimes so that the people could hunt him, right? So you see here as the god, the thing that people looked up to being something that provided them sustenance, right? And hence some self-fulfilling prophecy, some confirmation bias. They're going to keep doing what they're doing because they believe that when an animal comes down at times, it is the god coming down saying, hey, I'm offering myself as a sacrifice. You can kill me and you can eat me. But one thing to note is about these people with special powers, or even Kagan and the creator. They were well respected, but they weren't worshipped, right? Like you didn't want to piss them off, but you didn't have to like get on your knees and bow down to them. So another example of using spiritual explanations to explain unexplainable events, I guess, right? So more about mythology, okay? So they call these people, these creators and things like that, children of the early race. So what they did was they threw the sleeping sun up into the sky so that the light that shone from his armpit could illuminate the world. And that's interesting, right? I wasn't necessarily there for all of it, right? But it's an interesting depiction, but you can see how the illustration makes sense, right? They would say a fierce thunderstorm was a rain bull, and a gentle rainstorm was a rain cow. And what you can tell about that is that rain was a necessity in the desert, obviously, because that was the landscape they were living in. So they would naturally put some myths around these things. The San, they believe that anyone can interact with the spiritual realm. And they did this thing called the trance dance. And that was the main way that people in that realm could access the spirit world. Now, the trance dance sounds like a future song for sure, but I think we can all kind of get a slight depiction of what that might look like, right? So when they would connect with these people from the spiritual world, they would ask for things, right? They would ask for protection of their livestock or more production in terms of their harvest. They might even plead for the lives of sick people, So who do they pray to, right? What did they pray to? The Zan would pray to the stars and to the moon for good luck during hunting. And all the way through after death, what they would do is they would take the hair of a deceased person, and they believed it was transformed into the clouds when they burnt it. And ultimately, the clouds are shelter from the heat of the sun. So you can see how protection from those who are deceased comes in the form of clouds, right? Just how we always say that our elders look down upon us when they pass away, right? The wind is also said to blow away the human footprint when they die, but they're still present, right? So very, very interesting all around. And that was the Zamsan, right, from sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I think our next story is going to be a little bit more interesting, called the Sami. So it's going to be the power of the shaman, right, or the shaman, however you pronounce it, right? So this is around 10,000 BCE. So shamans, they're men or women who are believed to have special powers and knowledge. Okay, now what they do is they enter into an altered consciousness, and through that altered consciousness, they're able to travel to other worlds, and interact with different spirits. Now that's trippy, right? There's some trippy shit going on there. But I've seen many depictions of this, from different documentaries, National Geographic, Netflix, things like that. People have communicated with spirits for centuries going on, right? Shamans being one of them. So a little bit more in the weeds is that, the shaman is actually going to bargain with the spirits for good fortune in this world. Okay, the shaman is going to bargain for a good hunt or to cure the sick, right? So we see it being tied to sustenance again, right? So what this symbolizes, though, is the shamans are more of a community figure. They're not just out for their own personal responsibility or for their own personal well-being. They are seen as priests, right? Community outreach, things of that sort. They are all about helping the entire community kind of achieve some kind of spiritual salvation. So another thing to note is shamanism was practiced by many groups, and it evolved throughout history as well. And we're talking about the earliest forms, but it was practiced by the Vikings and in the medieval times as well. So if we think about the Viking god, Norse god Odin, Odin hung himself in an initiation on the world tree, right? And he also was said to be a form of a shaman himself, right? Because he had gotten a vision. And all these things are mythical, right? We don't exactly have concrete evidence to support it, and it's all belief and faith-based. So going back to the shamans, right? They were said to have been chosen by spirits. So in some cultures, the shamans would experience a prolonged period of very, very intense like illness or stress. And what that would do is that would lead them to a trance-like episode where they might be killed and even brought back to life, right? Now, what I equate this to in modern day is like someone who beats cancer, right? Someone who beats cancer generally has a newfound perspective on life, right? They might take things a little bit more lightheartedly. They might their bite for life might increase a little bit more. They might take every day as their last, something along those lines, right? They have this newfound lust for life, or a new perspective. So that's what it means to me. It also kind of correlates to psychedelics for me, right? So if anyone here has ever messed around with psychedelics, you know that it will give you a different perspective on the world. It can open your eyes, and you often feel connected with things that are a bit beyond this world. And I'm not doing that justice, right? But one thing you can think about is when you're wearing sunglasses for hours, right? And you take them off on a sunny day. The way the light and the colors and everything hits you is so vibrant. So to me, that's kind of what this experience equates to, right? So going back to the shamans, they were said to have these quote unquote helping spirits in the form of animals like wolves, bears, reindeer, fish, right? Any of those things. And the shaman might honestly imitate this animal when going into that trance. So like my thought is, imagine just watching that. Imagine being around for that. Watching a guy make a wolf sound and just start howling. That's bound to pull on some of your emotional strings, right? Of the viewer. Like they're probably going to be like, oh shit, this guy's like either really crazy, right? Or he's communicating with another spirit. right? And I'm sure back in the day, folks thought he was actually communicating with the spirit, right? Maybe he was, right? But I think today it might be taken just a little differently. So the shamans would enter this trance, right? We were talking about how they go into these trance, and it can honestly be from physical deprivation, like fasting, right? Has anyone ever done an intermittent fast? And they're not the same, right? You're not the same as when you eat, right? When the blood's pumping and things of that sort. So just some food for thought there. So these shamans would enter their trances through three methods, right? So like I said, the first would be intense physical deprivation. A couple examples they use in the book is they would work naked in the freezing Arctic temperatures. And like I said, imagine when you're not fasting or you're not regularly sleeping or you're in any kind of physical deficit, right? You're going to be different from when you're balanced. So it makes sense why they might be in this state of like euphoria before going to that spiritual state. The second method would be the rhythmic beating of a sacred drum. Kind of like static noise in the background, right? Just hitting the same drum, hearing water droplets drop, just repeatedly, right? Hearing a waterfall go. Any of those things can get you into kind of a trance. And when you turn it off, you're kind of startled a little bit, right? It feels weird to hear complete silence. So I can imagine them beating a drum for hours on end. It probably puts someone into a different state. And then lastly, and thirdly, the most obvious, eating a psychotropic mushroom, right? Now, one thing I'll say is obviously taking shrooms is going to get you there, right? So I feel like that one doesn't really need explanation. If you take a psychedelic, you're definitely going to enter into a different state for a little bit. So yeah, I'll leave that one at that. So all the while, when either of these things were happening, right? Any one of these three or a combination were happening, they would have a shaman who was going into the trance, and someone would watch him, and maybe the women might sing songs about the tasks that needed to be performed in the upper and lower realms. So one really crazy story that they mentioned in the book was that there's supposed to be a set of magic words that would bring the shaman out of this trance. They say that one shaman sat still for 3 years because someone forgot the words. And once they remembered the words, his legs started trembling and he came back to. Now, I also wish I was there for this because it would have been amazing whether it was real or fake. So in the scenario that this was real, that shaman is stuck for 3 years in a trance. I wonder where he went and what the experience of being in that trance was, right? Now, if it's fake, props to my dude for sitting still for 3 years. I don't know if that's physically possible for a human being, but, I get proven wrong all the time. So there's no telling what the human body is capable of. But interesting all around. So, so many of these rituals and these trances seem to have developed because people were in harsh locations, right? Where food, water, access to wildlife was so scarce that they were forced to submit to a higher power. Now, that's just my logical reasoning, right? They had to submit to something outside of their control to explain these issues so that they could live and thrive. Now, they're almost quick to attribute the harsh reality to a third party or higher power. Now, my point is, if you think about how long ago this was, there was probably really no idea of science. And I don't want to take away anything from these people, but we've seen time and time again that ancient people are more sophisticated than we actually thought. So we don't know the exact truth of what went on, but just interesting to see how they put structure around their society. Some of the Inuit people, the Inuit people in northern Canada, they still believe in these shamans, right? They believe in this underworld god, and they believe that the underworld god would not let any of the seals go, right? And that's what the Inuit people rely on for food. They would not let the seals go if the people displeased her. But if the people went down to quote-unquote braid her hair, she would let the seals go so people could eat, right? So now we see some explanations, right? We see some fact with some figment potentially as well, right? So just an interesting story about you know, how different people create their different realities, right? And who's wrong? Who's to say any of these are wrong? They could all be real. It's just interesting to me what different people believe in across the world. So we'll hop off our topic of the shamans, right? And we'll go into our last story for the day, which is Aztec, Mayan, and the other Mesoamerican people. And this generally took place from the 3rd through the 15th century in Mexico. So the main thing we're going to talk about is human sacrifice with the Aztecs and the Mayans. So it was an integral part of society in the early civilizations of Mesoamerica, right? The Mesoamerican people were primarily in the region of present-day central Mexico down to Nicaragua. Now, chronologically, the Mayans were there before the Aztecs, according to history. The Mayans were about 250 CE to 900 CE, and then the Aztecs were about 1300 to 1400. So it seems like to me the Aztecs are the ones that are portrayed a bit more in media because they seem more aggressive with their tendencies and their sacrifices. But that's all speculation. That's just what I see. The Aztecs actually took a lot from Mayan civilization, and they both have a lot in common as you get closer to them. Different names, but similar gods, similar traditions, right? And both of the cultures believed that, blood-related sacrifice to the gods was essential to success and survival, okay? And the main logic is this. So the gods made terrible sacrifices, incredible sacrifices when creating this world, including sacrificing their own blood in order to create humans. So in return, humans have to sacrifice their blood, right? And this makes total sense, okay? And that idea also carries over into Christianity and Catholicism, right? The idea that we're sinners and that we should be grateful for God's sacrifices and we're unworthy. So we constantly have to pay tribute to God or to the God or a God for good fortune and whatnot, right? So that's fine. I get that, right? But let me talk about my personal belief on this situation for a second, right? So nobody asked to be born, right? I know obviously life is a gift and we should be grateful for it and just, rattling off at the mind here. But if we didn't ask to be born, and even though it's a gift, why should we feel like we have to pay someone back, right? I get the idea of karma as well, but I think our parents might have done the same thing to us, at least coming from an immigrant family, where it's we should be indebted to our parents because they gave us everything, they brought us up, they gave us life, but at the same time, they chose to have children, and we didn't choose to be born, right? So, just some food for thought there, right? Obviously, always open and hearing feedback on that one. I love talking about those things, but just my thought on that. So, coming back to the Aztecs, right? There's a story that they have about the creation of our world here, and the god of the wind, right, was said to have created and destroyed 4 earlier eras, and I believe the 4th or the 5th was the one that we live in. So we'll go back to the god of the wind. Quetzalcoatl, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and then his brother Tezcatlipoca. I'm gonna butcher these. So essentially, what they did was they tore a goddess in half to make a new heaven and a new earth, and from her body grew everything that humankind would need to sustain life. And now they go into a bunch of different stories, right? But all of the stories are some type of sacrifice by a god, and in return, humans must suffer or sacrifice as well. So in Aztec culture, every 52 years was a cycle that could indicate the end of the world. Human sacrifices could be made to appease the gods and ultimately draw out human existence. We'll talk about battle. So in battle, Aztec warriors would seek to capture and not kill many of their enemies, so they could use them for sacrifice. And what that means to me is being an Aztec warrior or an Aztec prisoner would probably be the scariest experience, right? You don't know their language. They seem to be worshiping you. Maybe they seem to be happy to have you, but ultimately they're gonna do some very barbaric stuff to you, and all of it is for the wealth or for the continuity of their population, right? So what I'll paint a picture for you, what I'll do is paint a picture for you about this illustration in the book, right? So there, the picture is essentially four priests are holding each arm and leg of a prisoner, right? So one person on each arm, one person on each leg. There's a fifth priest that is stabbing the prisoner in the heart and cutting out his heart and letting the blood flow. So that takes us into the two types of bloodletting there was, right? So there was auto-sacrifice, which was self-inflicted bloodletting, right? So in this scenario, people would pierce their skin with stingray spines, knives, or sharp spines of the agave plant, right? And they would draw blood from the ear, the shin, the knee, the elbow, the tongue, or the foreskin. Now that went 0 to 100 real fast. So like I get the ear, I guess. I get the shin. I get the knee and maybe the elbow, right? But like why the tongue and the foreskin? I can imagine those are some sensitive areas, so I don't really want to get into that. But that's super visceral. I can imagine. Anyway, so I don't know if anyone follows the Islamic faith closely. There's also a branch of Islam in which they make themselves bleed, right? So you can see that this principle of giving back to God through blood is still a thing, right? Even through modern day. So what they would do is they would draw the blood from any of those places I mentioned onto bark paper and they would burn it. And the smoke from the offerings would be what was communicated with the gods, right? So you can see that logic, right? The smoke obviously goes up in the sky. Burning fire, obviously something very euphoric to engage with. So they would begin to feel very connected through their gods through these like this pain, right? That they would inflict upon themselves. So the second type of sacrifice would be human sacrifice. So the Aztec sacrifice was exactly what I painted for you in that picture that I just described. They would cut the victim's heart out from his body. The heart was said to contain some of the sun's energy, and by extracting it, it was like returning the energy back to the sun. Now, once again, I'll say you can see their logic here, but there's no science at the time to really refute that claim either. So who was to say they were wrong, right? If let's say one day they needed rain for a harvest, they cut some dude's heart out. Maybe they give some of the energy back to the sun. Whatever happens, and it starts raining. Why would they not do it again, right? That's a sign. So anyway, once the heart was removed from the body was rolled down the stairs of their pyramid-shaped temples, right? Down to the stone terrace at the base. A lot of times the victim's head, the arms, the legs were removed, and the skulls were displayed on a skull rack. Now, they don't say why that is, but it does seem very intimidating to do that. And maybe it set the fear of God, like in the rest of the citizens, And, sometimes these sacrifices would get, I wouldn't say out of control, but they would get very cumbersome, right? It was said that, during the rededication of one of the Aztec temples in 1487, about 80,000 victims were sacrificed to the gods. And their clotting blood formed these huge pools in the temple precinct. So now, imagine witnessing that. That was probably the most traumatizing thing ever. But maybe not at the time. Maybe it was usual at the time, right? It was also said that the victims were eaten by the priests. So they said if human flesh fueled the gods, it was kind of like communion, right? For that, like today. So it's not too crazy when you think about it in terms of, the body and the blood of Christ and things like that. So um, going forward, every year a young girl representing the corn god was sacrificed. Now, another thing here, I know I would personally not be able to have been part of that ceremony, because I know they were appeasing their god, but I think throughout time, um, it would be, even socially, it would be frowned upon to kill a small child. But that's just my thought there, right? It would be terrible for me to see a small child being sacrificed, someone who hasn't experienced the world at all. There was also this ritual in which a priest who impersonated a god would wear the skin of a prisoner, and the skin would be tightened around the priest until it tore away, and the impersonator would emerge like a fresh shoot from a husk seed, right? So some symbolism there. But all I can think about is if anyone's watched The Office, where Dwight cuts off the mask of the dummy and puts it on his face, right? That's me making it lighthearted because I can't really deal with the image of some dude wearing another dude's skin. So anyway, going forward into a few centuries, right? So we all know that Hernan Cortez from Spain came to Mexico, right? And he arrived in around 1519. And, I can imagine, right? He probably came in armor with a sword, looking very majestic. They thought he was a god, right? Or a returning god. So they would send him these corn cakes dipped in blood as an offering. And I'm not sure if he wanted that, or he was probably like, what the hell, when he first got his blood dipped corn cake. But he might have thought it was, strawberry jam and ate it. But I don't know, super gross, right? I imagine that thing was rotting by the time it got to him. Anyway, at the time that Cortez arrived, the Aztec civilization was only about 4 centuries old, and they were completely destroyed by the Spanish. Stood no chance. There was a massacre. But talking about the religion specifically, right? They say that the religion of the Mayans and the Aztecs was a combination of Catholicism with traditional Mayan beliefs. There were wooden crosses in the homeland of this tribe called the Chiapas in southern Mexico. Obviously referencing the Christian crucifix. And then the Tzotzil people of that region as well associate the sun god with the Christian god and the moon with Virgin Mary, right? So we see the foundations for later religions being built here. Now, that's all I had for you guys today. I know we're getting into some more deeper, controversial topics potentially, so feel free to engage me on these things. I love talking about them. But yep, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. Feel free to leave me any feedback, and remember, only positivity. Thanks, guys.